Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I hope you had a wonderful holiday season. Christmas, if you celebrate it, and New Year's, it is now 2018, a brand new year, so that is always exciting. I hope that you maybe got some new books over the holidays, or you have set a reading goal for 2018. I see a lot of people are doing that on Goodreads, so good luck with that if you have set that goal. I always support any reading goals. I have another author interview for you today. I'm excited to introduce you to Margarita Montimore, who has her debut novel coming out on January 10th, so next week. It is called Asleep from Day, and it is so good. I want to tell you everything, and I want to tell you nothing, because I don't want to give anything away, but it's so good. I want to throw a bunch of stuff out there and be like, yeah, this is awesome, and you must read it. I'm just going to give you the blurb, though, because I don't want to give any spoilers, and the blurb will be safe. So here we go. Astrid can't remember the best day of her life. Yesterday. A traumatic car accident erases Astrid's memories of September 9th, the day she spent with an oddly charming stranger named Theo. Ever since, she's been haunted by surreal dreams and an urgent sense that she's forgotten something important. One night, she gets a mysterious call from Oliver, who knows more about her than he should and claims he can help her remember. She accepts his help, even as she questions his motives and fights a strange attraction to him. In order to find Theo and piece together that lost day in September, Astrid must navigate a maze of eccentric Boston nightlife, from the seedy corners of Chinatown to a drug-fueled Alice in Wonderland-themed party, to a club where everyone dresses like the dead. In between headaches and nightmares, she struggles to differentiate between memory, fantasy, and reality, and starts to wonder if Theo really exists. Eventually, she'll need to choose between continuing her search for him or following her growing feelings for Oliver. Astrid might go to extreme lengths to find what she's lost, or might lose even more in her pursuit to remember, like her sanity. So that is the description of Asleep from Day by Margarita Montimore. As I said, it's her debut novel, and it comes out next week on January 10th. And it is, as I said, it is so good. I don't even have enough words to describe to you how good this is, how it just sucked me in, how I wanted to know more. I wanted to find out what was going to happen. I wanted to find out what had happened during that lost day. I was right there with Astrid in wanting to find out the answers. But again, I do not want to give you any spoilers, so I'm going to just turn now to Margarita's interview and let her talk about her book, so that anything that is said is hers to say, and I will not be accused of spoiling anything. So here we go. Hi, Margarita. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you?
Hi, Sarah. I am fantastic, and I'm so excited to be joining you on this podcast, and thank you so much for having me.
So we are here today to talk about your book, Asleep from Day, which comes out on January 10th. But first, before we talk about the book, I would like my readers just to get to know you a little bit. So whatever you're comfortable sharing would be great.
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I worked in publishing and social media for quite a while, about 10 years total. My last career, I would say, was in social media. I was very, very lucky to work for companies like Marvel and Google, and work for some big brands like Visa, Neutrogena, and had a really great career, but it wasn't the passion, the big thing that I wanted to do, which was writing fiction. So my now husband several years ago made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and he said, well, if you move out to the suburbs with me, you can write books and, follow that big writing dream and see what you could do to make it happen. So I did that. I left the city. I left the hustle and bustle, the career, and just started focusing on writing my stories, and it's been really amazing. And I am very, very excited to have my first book being published January 10th.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's talk about that book. It's called Asleep from Day. And if you could give us just a little bit of insight into the story.
Absolutely. So Asleep from Day follows Astrid O'Malley. She is 24 years old and wakes up from a car accident and is sort of in the process of rebuilding her life, because her life takes on this turn of unfortunate events that, after the car accident, she has issues with her job and her apartment, and she goes through this process of rebuilding her life. And as she does so, she realizes that she cannot remember anything that happened the day before her accident. And so she has this 24-hour period that is unaccounted for. And one of the narrative threads of the book is following what happens during her lost day, during which she meets this really charming and mysterious stranger named Theo and has this epic day and date with him that kind of follows their travels through the city of Boston as they visit all these places and have all these little mini adventures. And so as she's trying to remember what happened that day, she meets another mysterious stranger, Oliver, who claims that he can help her remember, and she ends up kind of taking this journey also through Boston and Cambridge, trying to put back the pieces. And as she does so, she starts to sort of question, what is she actually remembering? What might she be imagining? And, trying to kind of get a sense of, what is actually real.
Thank you. It's set in Boston. You said you grew up in New York. Part of it does take place in New York. So Boston itself actually, it's almost a character in itself. Can you talk a little bit about why it's set in Boston? Why you chose that location?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so glad you said that, because for me, it is my love poem to Boston. I went to college there, and I actually went to college there during the time period. It's set in 1999, so I graduated in 2000. And since then, when I'd come back to visit in the years following, there was always some change that I noticed and some place that I loved that was no longer there. And I just saw the city evolving, and I felt like I was losing these pieces that I loved so much, and I wanted a way to capture the energy and because when you go to college, it's such a time of possibility and emotional turbulence and inspiration. And so I wanted to encapsulate that feeling at that time in that place, and also kind of have a way to revisit the Boston that I knew and loved so much. So it's my love poem and my time capsule for the city.
Okay, thank you. And then a question about the title, Asleep from Day. Can you talk about the kind of ambiguity of that title?
Sure. So, it literally, first of all, there are a lot of dreams in the book and dream sequences that kind of create this sense of unease and of things being a little bit surreal and dreamy. So I wanted to kind of create that feeling of everything is normal except it feels 1 degree removed. And so, Asleep from Day, I feel like it conveys that the dreamy vibe that I'm going for. And also it just is also appropriate for kind of, she's trying to recover this lost day. And, in her sleep, she has these, colorful, vivid, at times they're flat out nightmares, which actually go a lot to illustrate what's happening in her mind, in her life, and, kind of the situation that she's in. And also, I have to admit, Asleep from Days Chemical Brothers song that I listened to a lot while I was writing this book, and also just has this feeling of kind of dreaminess, and it's just, I feel like it conveys the energy and the spirit of the book really well.
Okay, thank you. So what was your inspiration for this particular story?
A long, long time ago, we're going back before the era of missed connections and Craigslist and all of that. I remember reading, or I think I actually saw it on the news. It was this human interest story about a guy. He met this woman, and funny enough, this was in Boston, and this is like before he even went to college in Boston. He met this woman on the bus, I believe it was, and they only talked for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. The only thing he could remember that they talked about was Kevin Bacon. And he was so taken, this woman, she got off a few stops later, and he couldn't stop thinking about her. And he had no way of finding her because, you know, this was in the 90s, in the early 90s, I think. So what he did was he put up flyers all over the city to try to find her again. And like, so the flyers mentioned we were on this bus at this time. We talked about Kevin Bacon, and it was, nobody did that kind of thing back then. So it got picked up by all of these local news outlets. And then, I mean, since I saw the story in New York, it must have become this like national human interest story. And I just remember finding that so obsessive and romantic and weird and awesome and, you know, like a little bit creepy maybe, but at the same time so cool that like, wow, that, you know, this man was so taken just in a few minutes that he went to these lengths to find this woman again. And I don't remember if he actually ever did, because the story I saw was him looking for her. And it just stayed with me for years and years and years, and finally kind of sparked into something that became this book.
Oh, fascinating. Thank you. Yeah, I do wonder if he ever found her, or if when he did find her, if she wanted to be found. You know, there's all kinds of questions that come out of that. So give us some insight into the main character of Astrid. Is there anything that she will do that is going to resonate with readers, or do you feel like there's anything that she does that might not resonate with readers?
Well, I think she's an introvert at heart that is forced to be more of an extrovert as she rebuilds her life and goes on this search. She's very she accepts what life has given her, and she doesn't really have a big plan for her life or big expectations for her life. But when these kind of unusual events or extreme occurrences start happening to her, whether it's meeting Theo or getting hit by this car and, you know, all of these things that follow, because her life is so ordinary before that and takes on this extraordinary tone, it teaches her to want more and to dream more and to pursue the things that she wants out of life. And, you know, whether it's something like a job or whether it's finding this man that could be the man of her dreams, if he actually exists. So I think I think that people will relate to kind of being in your comfort zone, but also the need to step out of your comfort zone, and how, you know, when you are pursuing something that you really want in life, you have to at some point be uncomfortable and take risks and push yourself and push your limits. And what that looks like may be different for everybody, but I think that element of Astrid's character, which I know sometimes does become a bit obsessive, but I think that the persistence that she develops and the agency and kind of taking control of her life, I think that that's something that's relatable. And also the idea of, you know, passion versus pragmatism, and, you know, following what it is you want versus what it is that you feel like you need. And also one of the themes of the book is questioning memory and the unreliable nature of memory. And I've had experiences where we think we remember something a certain way, but then we talk to a person that challenges what that notion is, and there's something very disruptive about that, thinking that, wow, like this reality, even though it's in my past and it already happened, I was so convinced that it looked like this, and now I have to kind of pivot and think about it in a completely different way. So that's another element I think people may be able to identify with.
Let me just jump in here after having Margarita describe the book and talk a little bit more about the main character, Astrid. We do have to take our first break of the podcast, but when we come back, we'll be talking more about the book and the setting and things that happen and decisions that Margarita made in terms of the writing and the genre, etc. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and we will be right back.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Margarita Montimore about her debut novel, A Sleep from Day. And as I mentioned before the break, she's going to speak more about autobiographical elements, if there are any in the novel, some of the other things that came through the writing process. And also, we're going to talk a little bit about the ending. But again, no spoilers. So back to that interview. You've touched on some of this already in terms of your love letter to Boston, etc. But are there other autobiographical elements in either the story or any of the characters?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, it's geographically autobiographical more than anything. And I would say with the exception of a couple of places, almost every place that's featured in the book, whether it's the Deli House Diner or the eatery in Chinatown, they're real places. Oh my God, Man Ray, the nightclub that they go to, I lived there practically when I was going to college. So, those are my old haunts too. As far as the characters, they're either, a lot of them, actually Astrid, I sort of created out of just, she is not based on anybody at all. I would say the other characters, if they're based on real people, they're either hybrids or people that I knew peripherally. I find that when you're really close to somebody, it's hard to write about them because you know them so well. Whereas if you met a person once, you can much more easily invent a history and backstory and like different personality and quirks for them. So the real people that are in the book are not people that I was really close to, but people that either made an impression on me in some way or whose character traits I thought would be interesting to incorporate into the story.
And it takes place, as you said, in 1999, and you touched on that a little bit, but were there other reasons that you chose this particular year for the setting?
Yes. So, partly because I knew the city then, but also I thought it was very important that the story had to take place before social media, before the internet was widespread and made it so easy. It's nowadays, if you are looking for somebody, you can just go into Facebook, you can look for them online. And back then, in 1999, I mean, if you lost somebody's phone number, you might never see them again. It was much tougher to find people, and it was much easier to lose them. So I wanted to give Astrid these much more of a hurdle and kind of also task her with more inventive and unconventional ways to track down this mystery man that she's looking for. And then kind of coincidentally, and it's funny kind of when you make a creative decision and find other things that support that decision, I like the idea of it's also 1999, everybody's worried about Y2K, but that's also when I discovered that before Y2K, there was all of this concern in the technology world about the 9999 bug, where people were like programmers were concerned that because I apologize for anybody who may be listening who like knows way more about this than me, or if I'm explaining it incorrectly, but there was concern that programs would shut down because 9999 is a command that would like terminate programs. So I loved the idea of having the missing day take place on September 9th, 1999, and kind of so that kind of her own programming gets a little bit out of whack on that day too. Right.
Why this particular genre? Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Did you ever consider a different genre for the story?
It's funny you say that. I actually wrote the story and then tried to figure out what the genre was. So I don't kind of set out, when I write a story, I don't really sit down and say to myself, right now I am going to write a literary piece of fiction, or I am going to write a romance or a thriller, or I just write it and then I look for how I can position it. So, and I've also discovered over the course of writing 3 novels that I don't really know that my writing fits into a specific genre, because I like the fact that it has elements of these other things that, you know, it goes to certain dark places, but there's always some humor and there's sarcasm and pop culture elements. There's some elements of mystery and romance and psychological suspense. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would probably have an easier time if I did write to a specific genre, but I personally love stories that flirt with different genres and aren't easily classifiable, so I'm hoping that there are a lot of readers out there like that who will appreciate that about my work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does cross a lot of different genres, which actually I find a lot in some of the books that I read, and I kind of like it because it exposes you to things that you might not read otherwise.
It's also realistic because real life isn't one thing.
Right.
So when I'm writing stories about people that I want to jump off the page, you know, they're not going to be in one mood or, you know, following one single theme. Like, it's going to have different facets and dimensions and layers to it.
So we talked a little bit about this before, and you before we started recording, and you mentioned it in the acknowledgement section of your book. So I don't want to give anything away because the book is great and follows lots of twists and turns, but you've had some initial reaction to the ending. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I am so spoiler sensitive, so I won't give anything away, but to give you an idea of kind of the extreme reactions I've had over the ending, I have had one friend of mine who read an early version of the book who said to me, if I wasn't reading my book on a tablet, I would have thrown it across the room.
Oh no!
And then but she loved the book too. So, and then I had another early reader say when she read the ending, she burst into tears, like in a good way, that it hit her in her heart that much.
Oh wow!
And then I would say one of the more common reactions to the ending is initially people feel kind of thrown off and maybe a little bit angry, but then once the dust settles and once they really kind of get to sit with it for a little while, they appreciate it and come back to me and say, you know what, this is the right ending for this book. And it's funny because when I thought so much about this ending, and more so than probably any other aspect of this book, and I brainstormed. I have to give credit to my husband, Terry, because I brainstormed for hours and hours and hours with him over this ending, and he gave me this idea of how to end it. And as soon as he said it, I was like, yep, this is it. This is the perfect ending. And I remember at that time I had read Gone Girl, and when I read the ending of that book, I was livid. And then about a little bit of time passed, and then I was like, oh no, this is perfect. Like I hated it and I loved it. And I also loved that it inspired such a big reaction from me, and that I kept thinking about this book for so long after I had finished it. And so I feel like a very resolved and neat and unambiguous ending to a story that relies, and I'm talking about my story here, that relies on creating a sense of the surreal and dreamy. I don't want to wake the reader up abruptly. I feel like that there has to be a little bit of uncertainty that kind of still lingers. So I think that also hopefully will get them to keep thinking about the book after it ends. But for anybody who may experience a little bit of frustration, I will also say that while this is meant as a standalone book, because I have gotten an early reader response saying that, they would have loved to know more and read more, I haven't ruled out the possibility of a sequel, and I actually have some ideas gelling where it would be kind of a sliding doors type, following two possible realities for Astrid. So that is something that may happen down the line.
Mm-hmm. And I can completely resonate with a lot of those reactions, because as I told you, I loved the book, and I was reading it and, kind of composing responses in my head to you as I was reading it. Oh, I love this. This is awesome. It sucked me right in. And then at the end I was like, I hate this book. And then I didn't really hate it, actually, but once I started sitting with it, it really does stick with you, which is great. But now I've just decided I'm going to blame your husband. So.
And you know what's so funny? Every time I read him either an early review or an email or whatever it is, a note from a reader mentioning something negative about the ending, he goes, I'm sorry. And I say to him, you know what? I have had so many chances to change this ending. If I had changed the ending, I know that I wouldn't get like such a big reaction, positive or negative, on it, but I live and die by this ending, and I am sticking to my guns. So, if that hurts me down the line, or, if I suffer for it, like, I still am completely 100% behind it. So, there's no need to send him any hate mail. Like, I take full responsibility for it.
Yes, please leave the hubby out of the hate mail.
He designed such a pretty cover. Why don't we focus on that instead?
Yes. Yeah. So we're going to transition a little bit away from the book specifically and into your writing a little more generally. You said that you moved from New York to the suburbs to begin writing, but had you been writing before that? Is writing something that you'd always wanted to do?
Yes, I've been writing. I mean, it goes back to 6 or 7 years old, where I was in some kind of stationery store. I pointed to a Hello Kitty diary and asked my parents, like, please get this diary for me. It had a lock on it, so I felt very comfortable sharing my secrets with it as a small child. And really, ever since then, I was writing, a lot of it was diaries. And then I moved on to poems and short stories. But I think when it really became cemented for me was when I was about, I believe, 16. I was a junior in high school, and I took this absolutely phenomenal creative writing class. And it was a workshop, and our teacher was, I thought, like the coolest woman in the world. She rode a motorcycle. She had her nose pierced. She told us these crazy stories. She dropped F-bombs. Like, she was awesome. And she fostered this environment where everybody felt so free to express themselves. And even though it was a workshop and we critiqued each other's work, at the same time, it was so supportive, and you could feel the creativity. Like, anybody I talked to, like, years and years after, who was in that class with me, like, they all say, like, that was a magical class. Like, there was just something, nobody ever had that kind of experience again. So, for me, that's when I realized, like, oh my God, like, this is what I love to do, and I have so much to say, and I now feel like I have the freedom to express these stories. And, I felt like I found the love of my life in terms of, my path and my passion.
And so we have another author who knew really early on in her life what she wanted to do. I am always so impressed and a little bit envious of people who just know with such conviction at an early age that this is what they are meant to be doing. We do have to take our second break of the podcast, and when we come back, we'll be speaking more, of course, with Margarita. We'll be concluding the interview and talking a little bit more about her schedule, her advice for aspiring authors, where we can find her on the internet, etc. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and we will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We're going to get right back into the interview and the conclusion to that interview with author Margarita Montimore about her debut novel, Asleep from Day. So talk about your schedule a little bit. What does writing look like for you? Do you have a favorite place? Do you have a certain time that works best for you?
I should be more regimented than I am, considering I have a high maintenance but absolutely wonderful dog. I have a white German Shepherd named Cooper who is very, very active. She's only 2 years old, so she's very young. So I have to take her on like hour-long hikes every day so that she's tired for the afternoon, and that's when I get most of my writing done, I would say, and not every day. And because I also I'm a freelance editor and book coach, so that's the afternoons are kind of the quiet time when I get work done, period. My favorite time to write, though, is late at night, and I am such a night owl. I've actually noticed I feel my creative peak at 1 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And so when you have a dog that wakes you up at 9 a.m. like clockwork, that can be a little bit tough, but I try to balance that. For me, it's really just whenever I can find time. Even when I'm hiking with her in the woods, I have been known to just take out my phone and I will use the voice to text application, and I'll just transcribe a scene if I have something in my head or a blog post or whatever it is. So I don't really have a certain schedule. I want to try to become more consistent in terms of where. I have a home office. Before the dog, I used my treadmill desk all the time, and I would get a lot of writing done that way. But otherwise, it's funny because I've seen or I've read other interviews with writers that like they have a special room set up for writing, but they end up doing most of the writing like either on the couch or in bed. And so for me, I would say, some of it gets done in the office, but a lot of it gets done on the living room couch too. So it's really just, wherever I can squeeze it in or wherever the inspiration strikes me.
Right. So what are you working on now? What's next?
So, well, right now, I'm certainly busy with all the marketing and promotional stuff for Asleep from Day, but I am working on, I have 2 completed novels, and one of them I'm in the process of revising the very last part of. So I'm hoping to have that done within the next month or so, and it's actually an R&R, revise and resubmit, for an agent who happens to represent one of my favorite writers. So I'm really excited about that. Otherwise, I have another book that's completed that I think I want to rewrite 50% of. So that's kind of ambitious. I started and then I was like, this feels like a lot. Let me let this breathe for a little while. But then at the same time, since I don't draft quickly, I'm happy if I can do a book a year. And I've written 3 so far. This past year has been spent more like getting Asleep from Day ready for publication and working on editorial projects. So I really, really, really in 2018 want to finish drafting a book. I wrote a third of a book months ago that I kind of set aside. So I'm absolutely determined to start something new and complete it. And what that new thing is, depending on the reaction I get for Asleep from Day, as I said, I'm not opposed. I already have the little kind of buzz of ideas popping up in my head. So it might be a sequel to that. It might be a sequel to the book that I'm currently doing the R&R for, or it could be one of the handful of additional ideas that are sort of floating around.
Mm-hmm.
So
fun.
Yeah.
When you have time and you are reading, who are your favorite authors and what are your favorite genres?
So in terms of genres, as I said before, I actually like books that are sort of in between, or as soon as I see that something could be described in more than 2 or 3 different genres, like I'll be drawn to it right away. You know, I like contemporary literary. I like literary that moves. So upmarket really, I guess, would be. I feel like upmarket, I wish that was a more popular genre, like that it was on Amazon and it was on, you could go to Barnes & Noble and look at an upmarket bookshelf, because I know like book club fiction is often the term that's used with it as well, but I like the idea of a story where language is elevated, but it also has a plot, it's character driven, yet it's a story that propels forward. It's not just kind of a think piece or a piece exploring the beauty of language. And, other genres, I do love thrillers. I like historical fiction, I like more suspenseful historical fiction. In terms of my favorite authors, I love, love, love Lionel Shriver. She is, to me, the most underrated author that's out there right now. Those who are familiar with her may know We Need to Talk About Kevin, which was adapted into a film, but which also did not do the book justice. If people saw the movie and didn't read the book is so, so great and so much more than what the kind of the blurb makes it out to be. But she just writes smart, dense. There's always a level of darkness to them, but also I think she does a good job of balancing her ideas and cynicism with a thread of hope and optimism, and just her skill as a writer blows me away. Also, Margaret Atwood, she's the first writer I read for pleasure, that was kind of a cut above, that wasn't just like that I'm reading for fun. Like I kind of went from like Sweet Valley High, D.C. Andrews, Christopher Pike, and then I stumbled upon Margaret Atwood, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is not literature I'm reading for school and have to write a book report. Like it was my first foray into like literature that I was just completely, in love with, and where I saw like storytelling that can go to a whole other level. And then Milan Kundera is another favorite of mine, because I love that he breaks the biggest rule of writing, which is show, don't tell. His stories are almost entirely telling, and they're just full of ideas and insights, and they're brilliant. And then just a couple of others. I mean, I could keep going for hours, but I won't. I do love F. Scott Fitzgerald, particularly his short stories, though I will say controversially, because I absolutely love conspiracy theories. I heard recently a rumor that it's possible that Zelda wrote a lot of the work that he's credited with, and I whenever I read his work, I always felt like it had, one of the things I loved about it was that it had an emotional core that I had only encountered from female writers. Mm-hmm. So whoever wrote the F. Scott Fitzgerald stories, I love the emotion behind them and kind of what that evokes in me. And then I do love Gillian Flynn. I think she absolutely deserves all of the hype that she's getting. Her language just knocks me off my feet, and I cannot wait. I hope she's working on something new, because I'll read it in like a day, and I love her. I think she's fantastic.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
Do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Oh boy, do I. I would say grit and persistence are so important. You can have the best ideas, you can have what you believe is talent or what others tell you is talent, but it is about just not only just sitting down and finishing your story and revising your story, but it is about powering through all of the setbacks. This is such a tough industry because, and there's so much that's beyond your control. You can't control the market. You can't control reader subjectivity, but you can control your attitude towards it and your persistence, and you can control whether or not you believe the negative feedback you get and decide, I'm not cut out for this, I have no talent, or whether you power through it. So I think you have to learn to take criticism in stride and know when it's important to incorporate it into your revision and change your story and adjust it, and when you need to be true to your creative vision. No matter what, if people have mixed responses to your ending, for example, you have to develop a thick skin for rejection, because even the most phenomenal talents, you're going to get rejected, whether it's by agents, whether it's by editors, or just negative reviews. It's going to happen. And then, you have to read and write a lot and study your craft. No matter how good you think you ever are, you can be so much better. I think a great way to do this is to get critique partners, because as an editor, I've learned a lot as a writer, and the clients that I work with to help improve their stories, when I then go back to my own work, I see so much of kind of the same feedback that I give other writers. I kind of give that feedback to myself, and so I see kind of what works and how to become a better storyteller. So keep getting better. And then I would say also very, very important, lastly, do not compare yourself to other writers, whether they are writers that you read that you love, or writers that you read that you don't love, that you think, oh, I could do so much better than this. Even though it's very, very important, I think, to connect with other writers and foster a community with them, I think the thing you have to watch out for is that it's quite possible and probable, in fact, that
check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
You just work on making yourself better, writing the best possible stories that you can write, and just keep going no matter what. Let those setbacks happen and, become stronger after each one of them. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more thing.
Okay.
Especially because I do have a background in social media, which it's really helped me actually develop an author platform, and that is something that writers should do long before they get an agent or a book deal, because you're gonna, nowadays, even if you are lucky enough to get a deal with a traditional publishing house, you're still gonna have to do a lot of your own promotion, a lot of your own marketing. So, think about what you have to say as a writer and how you can connect with your future readers, how you can connect with other writers who are going to be supportive of you, who you can be supportive of, and work on fostering those connections now so that you're not scrambling down the line when you do have a story that you're ready to share with the world.
Mm-hmm. Which actually transitions nicely, so thank you for that last one, into where can people find you on social media, and do you have a website, etc.?
Oh, yes. I have just about everything. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram under the name Daniela, and that is D like David, A-M, so mother, I-E-L-L-A. And then my website is montimore.com. My Facebook page is Margarita Montimore. I do have a newsletter, a monthly newsletter that the sign-up links can be found on my Twitter, my Facebook, my everywhere pretty much. And then I actually have a website dedicated to my book, asleepfromday.com, and that has everything from the blurb. It has all of the links where you can pre-order the book or where you'll be able to buy the book. Contests right now. I have a contest running on Goodreads. I am also on Goodreads. So yeah, I think I've pretty much covered. I have other social channels I don't kind of update as often, so I've decided like these are the ones I need to focus on, and they keep me pretty busy as it is.
Yes, it does take a lot of energy to keep them updated. So the book comes out January 10th, and you mentioned the website Asleep from Day, where people can pre-order. I assume they can also pre-order on like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, those types of websites?
Yes, asleepfromday.com has the links to all of those places. It's on Amazon, Google Play, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, like it pretty much any device where, you know, you get your electronic books, or Amazon has the paperback available for pre-order. So yes, you should have no problem finding my book.
Okay, perfect. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like people to know about the book or about writing in general, or anything that we haven't covered?
I think we've covered a lot. I would say just overall, you know, one of the things that I've noticed, you know, as a trend, and this goes beyond just books. I think it's in movies and TV. I think that there's this reliance, and, you know, again, I know I'm on my soapbox about genres, but I think that it's easy to classify things a certain way, or, you know, we want to be able to kind of define things by genres easily, but I think it's very exciting to kind of look beyond what is already known or easily defined. And, you know, I would encourage people to tell stories that are different, that, you know, are not X meets X, that, you know, kind of push boundaries and not be afraid to kind of go beyond what it is the market wants or what it is that's popular, but really kind of write your passion projects and, you know, be weird, be original, be kind of, don't pander to the market, but tell the stories that are burning inside you. And I absolutely believe that if it's something that you're passionate about, there are going to be other people that are passionate about it too. And, you know, you will find your audience sooner or later.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with me. I loved the book. I might have hated it a little bit, but that only added to my love. So thank you again for writing the book and then for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Once again, I want to thank my guest, author Margarita Montimore, for taking the time out of her schedule to talk to me about her debut novel, Asleep from Day. As I have said already about 22 million times, I loved it. It's so good. Pre-order it. Go out and treat yourself to a New Year's book and just get lost in the story, because Astrid's already lost in the story. So go in there and be lost with Astrid. It's really good. You won't regret it. And even though it says it's, you know, kind of a psychological suspense book, it's not scary. It's not that kind of a book. It's just, you know, psychological in the terms of not knowing and trying to figure out, and just that journey and that adventure of trying to figure out what happened in that day that you can't remember. So again, it comes out January 10th. You can go to the website asleepfromday.com to find out where you can pre-order it. Go out and find a copy. You won't regret it. And that's all I'm going to say, because I could babble and babble forever. Here's something crazy that I'll tell you. I don't have any author interviews scheduled this week. This is the first week in a very long time that I haven't had an author interview scheduled. So next week, there won't be any author interviews. I will most likely do an episode. I'll be doing another episode on Thursday this week. I'll talk about books that I've read that I'm not interviewing an author for, which I haven't done also in a long time. So that'll be exciting. And then we'll see what next week brings. But I will be back with author interviews the following week. I'm interviewing another debut author, Susan Couples-Munger, about her book, The Fairies of Glendarren Hills. It is a children's book, a young adult book, and it is, obviously it's got fairies in it, so fairies and fantasy, and it's a lot of fun. You'll want to join me for that. In the meantime, you can find all of our podcasts at www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can download those podcasts on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, any app that you find for your mobile device. And you can follow us on social media. Please come, follow us, interact with us. Again, I'm saying us as though I am more than one person, but I mean us in the general sense of the podcast. Come and find me, us, it, whatever, on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. I hope you will join me again on Thursday when I talk more about books, just books that I've read, which I enjoy, and I hope you will too. In the meantime, go out there and get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.